Welcome to Western Technical College Business and Industry Services. This video, along with other training opportunities from Western BIS, are designed to help employees stay informed on the latest trends in today's changing workplace. To learn how Western can support your business, visit us at westerntc.edu/BIS.
So today we're going to talk about addictions and the holidays. It is a topic that is kind of near and dear to my heart. My background is in mental health and substance abuse counseling. I'm also a person in long-term recovery for both of those things myself. And so I understand intimately the challenges faced by individuals and their families, as well as workplaces, trying to deal with this time of year when there's some additional mental health and addiction challenges. Like Kim said, if there is any questions that come up that we can't get to today, please feel free to throw them in the chat and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. So really quickly, before we kind of dive into the holidays, I want to give a brief addictions kind of 101 so that we can get kind of a framework to look around or to kind of take everything into consideration. So most of us have heard addiction is a disease, right? We say it's a disease. Everybody can kind of regurgitate that, but then at the same time, the most prevalent feeling is like, you just got to knock that off. You got to stop doing that. And it's really kind of challenging, and it makes it harder to be a loved one when we're looking at these behaviors and we're not understanding kind of what is going on in the brain behind all those. So when we talk about the disease of addiction, it's really kind of a battle between our frontal lobe and our midbrain. And our frontal lobe is the last part of our brain to develop as we grow. And it's the part of our brain that allows us to kind of take a step back and look at long-term goals. It's why we're a bit impulsive when we're younger. And as we age, we kind of get that perspective, hopefully, some of us better than others. And so that frontal lobe really allows us to kind of do the adult thing and really kind of make long-term choices as opposed to those impulse behaviors. The midbrain is the part of the brain, we call it the reptilian brain or the lizard brain. It's the part of our brain that worked really good when we had to like run from tigers and climb trees. It gets us through the next 15 seconds, right? That's the part of the brain that's functioning, the only part basically when we're babies, right? If we're hungry, we cry. If we're scared, we cry, right? It doesn't have a moral compass. It doesn't think about other people. It really is just about survival. And what happens is as we grow old, slowly the control of our behavior switches from that midbrain impulsive part into our frontal lobe, except for when we get scared and the fight, flight, or freeze kicks in. And that's our midbrain, right? And so when that happens, frontal lobe gets shut down, midbrain kicks back in, and it gets us through the scary situation, okay? Now that's meant to be a very temporary thing to get us through really tough moments, and then it's supposed to revert back control. What happens in addiction is as we continue to use chemicals, it slowly starts to climb up the priority level on what our brain thinks is important. To eventually, what can happen is it can start to creep into those top 4 things of like eating, drinking, sleeping, and breathing, right? And it can even start to creep into there to where we'll use chemicals as opposed to eating, right? We'll use chemicals as opposed to sleeping, and it inserts itself much higher on the priority list than it needs to be. And that's a pretty complex process that it takes, but that's really what happens. And so where if any of you have ever jumped into a pool or jumped into a body of water, gone down too far, and that panic hits in, we're not thinking about like, rational thoughts or our, 401k. We're scratching and clawing and doing everything we can to get to the top of the water. And that's because our frontal lobe has shut down, midbrain is kicked in, wants to get us back up there. But what were to happen if drugs became as important as breathing? So you wouldn't need to jump into a body of water. You could be shown a drug, right? That's a really, really simple way to say that. But basically what happens, let's say we were to boil some water, okay? And in that water, we were to put some cocaine right into that boiling water. If you tried to reach into that boiling water, you would fry your hand, incapacitate yourself, never be able to use it again. Most people would be like, I wouldn't do it, right? Well, if we flip that scenario out and say, put $5 in there, how many of you would reach into the boiling water? Not many. Well, what happens if we were to start to increase that monetary amount to $100, $1,000, 10,000, a million? Like, at what point would your brain go from that's silly, I would never do that, to like, well, what if I'm really quick about it? What if, gosh, $10 million. What if I use my left hand instead of my right hand? I'm right-handed. I don't really use my left hand for much, right? And so, when we think about it that way, at some point, for many of us, there becomes a point where we start to contemplate doing it, right? And for many of us, there would be a point where some of us would go for it, right? The risk would outweigh, or the reward would outweigh the risk. And so that's what happens when we talk about addiction is it really is life or death. And so while most of us would sit there and go, that's silly, I would never do that. When our brain gets sick like that, it becomes so much more powerful. And the part of the brain that's making the decision to do that is no longer the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe loses out and the midbrain kicks in and says, we have to have it. And so you're making decisions. I don't know if any of you have ever done this in your younger days or whenever, where you used, you got so drunk and you woke up the next day and you're like, oh my God, I will never do that again, right? And you meant it. 100% you meant it. How many of you have ever done it again? Maybe not to that level, or maybe slightly differently, same kind of thing. The important thing to remember before we move on is that when we look at this behavior, it's really important that we remember that we're interpreting behavior of a sick brain from a healthy brain. So when I look at the behaviors of people who are struggling with addiction, and I go, why would you do that? And when they're loved ones that I care about deeply and they do these things, I just want to shake them. Why would you do that? And it's important for me to remember, if they were healthy, if their brain wasn't sick, they wouldn't do that, right? They wouldn't do that. So when we talk about addictions and the holidays, there's some really pretty significant challenges. And one of the main ones is that strong psychological or emotional component. And that goes for even people who have started their journey on recovery. The main source of relapse, something like 70% have it as one of the main factors, is they really, really struggle with the emotional roller coaster that happens after they discontinue substances. So substances do a really good job of kind of evening things out. Not in a healthy way, but it's effective. And so when you remove those, now you have to ride that wave, and it becomes very, very difficult for people to do that. There's really strong behavioral connections. Think about Halloween, right? Think about what you do when you get together with your family. In my family, we get together, whether it's for Christmas or Thanksgiving, right? We are having drinks and we're playing euchre and we're playing, nickel poker, and that's what we're doing, right? It is almost expected of us. It's how we get down. And that leads us kind of into those familial norms. How weird would it be for you to show up to a family get together and Uncle Bob isn't having a beer? Would it be normal, or would it be really strange, right? So for some of us, those familiar norms are really, really strong. In fact, when I got married, I was already in recovery. My wife was already in recovery. And it was the first time, I think, like 6 years, we were both in recovery. And for my wedding, I purchased alcohol. And it was the first time I had purchased alcohol since I started recovery. And I did that because, well, in my family, you don't go to a wedding without alcohol. That would just be ridiculous. You wouldn't ask other people to do that, right? Where does that come from? It's seems very normal for us, but it's not always that way. When my sister moved down south and she got married, and she said, talked to her in-laws about having alcohol at the wedding, they were kind of shocked. They were like, why would you have alcohol at a wedding, right? And she goes, have you been to Wisconsin, right? So some of these familial norms are really, really pretty strong. particularly connected to um, holidays, right? New Year's Eve. Think about what we do on New Year's Eve, right? Societal pressures, and this is a big one. Holidays, so many people think about the ways in which you talk about it. You just assume, oh, you're going to get together with family. Oh, are you traveling? Are you going to go see, what happens, and this is that lack of connections, what happens when you don't have family or you're estranged from that family, right? You almost have to like make things up to not feel like an outsider, even amongst friends. Or maybe you don't celebrate, right? Jehovah's Witness, you don't celebrate some of these things. There's a lot of pressure that goes along into it, and if you don't fit into that mold, it can feel really, really challenging to move forward. That lack of connections, kind of talked about that, but think about everybody else is home and away. Even work, maybe that you lose yourself into, is probably shut down for the day. And you have to not only sit there and be by yourself, but you have to really be faced with the fact that you don't have what most people call normal, right? You don't have what other people have. And that really gets thrown in people's faces. And, chemicals can help deaden that. And so when we tried to start doing this at first without that buffer, it's really, really difficult. So I wasn't quite sure how to go about this. So I wanted to kind of take a look at it from like a workplace perspective, a family and friend perspective, as well as a personal perspective. And all three of these levels, we can make an impact, right? We can help somebody. We can be the difference between a person starting or maintaining their recovery, right? Or a person going back on their recovery, right? On relapsing or on sliding back. And so I want to kind of take a look at some of the things that we can do. So when we're talking about a workplace solutions, it's really important to kind of think about the culture that we're creating. What is your workplace like around the holidays, right? Are there Christmas trees up? Do you do Secret Santas? Do you celebrate Hanukkah, right? What is going on? Are you assuming, do you guys have a Christmas party, right? What's that Christmas party like? Is it everybody goes to, the Bluffside Tavern and meets for drinks? Do you go out to dinner? What is that like? And what I really would like workplaces to think about is not to get rid of anything, right? But to think about their employees, their coworkers, their colleagues that might not feel the same way that they do about these situations, and really kind of incorporating that, not getting rid of, but adding and including things for other people. And that includes individuals with addiction challenges. And that goes into mindful messaging. When we are inviting people, and I always go back to, how many times are we at a conference or a workplace meeting where somebody has like the obligatory Packer Viking joke and the obligatory, glass of wine, having a drink joke, right? It's super common. We don't really think about it. It's a part of our culture, but in this way, it's really important that we start to think about these things, right? People can get into, oh, we're being politically correct by saying happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas, but think about the impact that could have on somebody that doesn't necessarily celebrate Christmas. The same thing can be transferred into people that are struggling with addictions. Don't assume that we have like this big family unit that we're excited to go and see, or that we do these healthy behaviors, because for a lot of us, that's really not the case. And just understanding that is important. Very much so, we want to increase awareness of resources. And we've seen this and not all employers do this. Western has been really, really good about understanding COVID times. And hey, take time for that self-care, step away from your computer, do these things. And they've been very, very purposeful about these things. Well, what if we translated that and we understood that holidays, in the holiday season, while joyous and wonderful for some people, can really be a cause of stress, anxiety, and challenges for other people, right? So while you're saying, enjoy family, enjoy your time away, if this is a time maybe that isn't quite so joyful for you, here's some other things that we have available. Here are some opportunities or some programs or some people that are there in case you need help, right? Or if you just don't feel like being alone, right? And making that a part of our messaging. And then offering alternatives. This is really kind of, if your company does things for the holidays, like a holiday party or a banquet or anything like this, it's really important not to do it at bars, okay? Sometimes those can be really easy and convenient, cheaper in a lot of ways, right? But we have to think about that messaging. When I first got into recovery, I don't think I went to a bar for about 3 years, for the most part. Now I can go for a while and it's not that big of a deal, but I don't, they're not my favorite place to be, I don't go to them unless it's important to somebody else, and then I'm there for a very brief period of time. So when we are planning these things, again, it's not about not doing something, it's about doing it slightly different to make sure that other people are included. And this is important to do even if you're like, we don't have anybody that struggles with addiction in this company. There's 6 of us. I would know. The reality is we don't always know. Outside of situations like this, I don't introduce myself as a person in long-term recovery, and you wouldn't know it by me walking down the street. And so we don't always know. So it's important to offer alternatives so that everybody can feel included and welcome. And it can be really cool if they don't have that family structure to go back to, for them to be able to look forward to their workplace family, right? We can play a really big role in whether or not somebody can start to enjoy these times or not. When we talk about family, maybe I'll go like this, strategy for family and friends. This is probably the most common question that pops up when I get to speak to people, is what can I do? I've got a cousin, I've got a brother, I've got a son or a daughter, I've got a mom, what can I do? And I'll tell you, family gatherings in the beginning were extremely difficult for me. I went to a wedding at 90 days of being in recovery, and it's the closest I've ever come to relapsing. So after that, I learned my lesson, and probably my very closest cousin, got married, and I didn't go to the wedding. There's some things that I did, and I'll talk about that later, but it can be really, really challenging. I didn't know how to celebrate Christmas at my family's. I didn't know how to celebrate New Year's Eve. I didn't know how to do any of those things without some type of use. For like 6 months after I got in recovery, I had an uncle who every time I saw him, I love him to death. He's a great guy, but he would always offer me a beer. I said, oh no, I don't drink anymore. Oh yeah. Right. But it was really, it was hard because I wanted a beer. Right. And I wanted to do those things. And so even those little things that were just niceness or politeness made it difficult. So sorry, I kind of went off there. Strategies, these are concrete things to do. Have your get-togethers during the day, okay? Now, most of my Christmases were during the day and people would still drink, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but by and large, it's much better to have family gatherings, to have these types of get-togethers during the day. It's just, it provides that little bit of a buffer. Even today, when I go to family get-togethers, I don't stay late, right? I go early and I say hi to my family and I get those connections, and then I'm out, right? Because I'm not going to ask them to not do their thing, and I don't really want to be around it when they do. We should really avoid pressuring directly and indirectly. So like my uncle, who would always offer me the beer, I've been in situations where it was even more pressuring, where people were like actively like, you think you're too good to have a drink for us, or come on, it's weed, that's not even really a drug. Really try to be careful, avoid pressuring. If the only activity that you do is a drinking game, like a card game and a drinking game, or maybe you're doing some type of an activity that includes drinking, like what am I supposed to do if that, if that's the only activity going on in the family? I can go sit down in the basement and hang out with the kids, or sit there and drink my soda every time I'm supposed to have drink a beer. That's really, really triggering in the brain, especially of somebody that's early in recovery, and we don't want to do that. The other thing that a lot of people don't think about is if you ever, and this kind of goes for any time, but it's particularly important as we're coming through the holidays, if you do offer somebody a drink and they say no, just accept that, right? It's astounding how many times people are like, well, why? I can remember when we would go out to dinner with a new couple, and we, neither my ex-wife or I would order a drink, right? The first thing they thought for me, like, oh, are you a recovering alcoholic? The first thing they thought for her was that she must be pregnant, right? Because, well, why else would you not have a glass of wine? And so just not even asking why can be really, really helpful. I'll tell you right now, one of the things that was most helpful for me, one of the things that I would offer to clients and say, hey, if you got to go to this family get together, if you can't avoid it, try to find somebody that you can take with you, right? Even if it's somebody that's not in recovery or have an issue, just having one other person there that's not drinking, that's not smoking, that's not doing those things can be your lifeline. That type of support has actually helped me get through quite a few different scenarios. That wedding that I went to, I asked my older brother to come with, and the only thing that kept me from getting drunk that night, honestly, was that I didn't want to drink in front of him. I didn't want to disappoint him. And so offering that, right, to your family member, to your loved one, hey, I'll come with you and I won't drink, because that make it easier. That can be really, really helpful. If they have some type of other support network, whether it's a 12-step program or some type of a support group or a church group, maybe they've got something going on that you can attend with them, an open AA meeting that lets anybody come through. Going to those the night before or right afterwards or right before can really help a person kind of fill up their recovery cup and allow them to get through some difficult situations, right? And offering to do that, to be a part of that, can be a big step in whether or not a person does it or just tries to white knuckle it. And then alternatively offering something fun alternatives, right? So I remember an aunt of mine was really awesome. She did a hot chocolate bar. And so, like, the adults and everything were like mixing up old fashions and stuff like that. And I still got to mix a drink, right? And I was with the younger kids and I was helping them do all that stuff. And it was just a really cool, thoughtful way to help me feel included. And I really, really appreciated that. Physical games, not just cornhole, right? But flag football, hide and go seek, right? Like, getting the whole family involved in an activity that does not include just sitting around drinking and shooting the breeze. I almost swore there and I prevented myself. Board games, versus card games, different things like that. Maybe wait a little bit before we start the euchre tournament, before we start the hold'em or the nickel poker. All of those things can be really helpful for somebody that might be trying to do holidays for the first time or early in their recovery. If you are a person yourself that has struggled, I want to say this upfront and very much without hesitation: it's okay not to attend. If you are a family member and somebody decides not to attend, you should absolutely not hold that against them, right? In the beginning, I couldn't do those things. And if my cousin at that wedding would have guilted me, I would have felt horrible. I would have come and I don't know what would have happened. Instead, when I said, hey, I love you, I love you, I can't come to your wedding, here's why, she was like, perfect, no worries. Why don't you come down the day before? We'll just go out to dinner, the three of us. It was absolutely amazing. I was so, so very grateful. But I do want to tell people it is okay not to go. right? You don't have to do it if it's an unsafe environment. Setting up alternative gatherings. And so that's what I did with my cousin. That's what I've done for a few other situations where I want to connect with these people, but I don't want to go to the New Year's Eve party. I don't want to go to the Christmas Eve party. Let's meet for lunch, right? The day before. We'll give gifts then, right? It's a smaller setting, which is things that I enjoy better anyway. But I still get to have that connection. I still get to feel a part of, but I don't have to be in an environment that's really, really dangerous for me. Bringing that support friend is a huge piece. I always say if there's something that you cannot avoid, bringing as many recovery tools with you as possible is a big one, and having that as a person is a huge strength and I don't want to say crutch, but like something that you can rely on and lean back to. Attending alternative activities, particularly in the La Crosse area, we are really blessed with a strong recovery community. So whether it's Christmas Eve, New Year's, Oktoberfest, 4th of July, there are almost always recovery activities going on during those times. And so there's almost always like an AA dance, which can be super awkward if you've ever gone to a dance that doesn't include alcohol. It is just like you remember from middle school. It's a struggle when you first do it. But as you kind of get used to doing those things, without chemicals, it becomes easier and easier. And so I would highly, I did not sit at home and do nothing during holidays for a really long time. New Year's Eve was a real big challenge for me. And I went to one of those alternative things till, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, probably for the first 7, 8 years of my recovery. Now I'm older. I take my kids to the 10:30 fireworks show and I'm in bed and I'm cool with that. But early on, I needed that alternative activity. Asking for help, whether it's from people in recovery or family and friends, it's okay to be struggling this time of year, right? You're not, so often what we think is that we're wrecking somebody else's holiday with our struggles or our needs. And that's simply not the case. The greatest gift that I could give to a family member is if they called me up and they're like, hey, Keith, I really need to quit drinking. I've started that process. I'm afraid of going to Christmas Day. I don't want to, be rude and miss out, but it's just going to be a struggle. I would absolutely be all over that, and it would bring joy to my life to help with something like that. The last thing that I want to kind of finish up with is don't use no matter what. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we put ourselves in situations that we probably shouldn't, like the wedding at 90 days. By not using, I was able to learn from that, right? And I was able to grow from that and understand myself and my needs and my challenges and my triggers and my strengths. If I were to use, I lose that opportunity for growth. And so if you are a person who is going through the holidays and trying to stay on their path of recovery, right? You may think you can do something, it won't be an issue because it's never been an issue. You get there and it's a struggle and you didn't expect that. That's okay, right? Leave as soon as you can. Whatever you do, don't use, right? It gets better. They say this too shall pass, and I happen to agree with that. Okay. And then lastly, I just want to give some resources out here, and we can make this PowerPoint available. Cooley Recovery Center is a really, really strong clearinghouse for all things support and recovery. So you can give them a call, or you can go on their website. They've got lists of meetings of all different kinds, not just 12-step, but the SMART recoveries and different therapy groups and things like that. There are support groups 7 days a week, 365 days a year, multiple groups every single day in the La Crosse and surrounding areas. So there's always support groups if you do enjoy that 12-step philosophy. SMART Recovery is more of like a cognitive based support group. So it looks at, rational emotive behavior therapy style stuff, but it's more cognitive as opposed to the spirituality based 12 steps. So a lot of people like Smart Recovery as opposed to, or in conjunction with. Most religious institutions, your church will have people that can help you get connected or help you feel supported. And then professional counseling, even in the COVID times, they've got telehealth. You don't have to go to just the hospitals. There are a lot of, peace of mind counseling and, driftless recovery services. There's a lot of really good counseling agencies in this area we can take advantage of. So that is it. I got about a minute. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you for viewing this video from Western Technical College Business and Industry Services. Learn more about the hundreds of training and development opportunities available for your employees at westerntc.edu/BIS.